welcome to another episode of Dial It Up. Today we are going along with our theme. This week is Team-Based Week. So it's been mentioned on MetaLab, it's going to be mentioned on Metafix, here on Dial It Up, our game, maybe possible more than one game this week. We're all going to do all about team bases. This is a subject that has actually been requested by a couple of our viewers for me to go over how exactly to run team bases. They have been in the game for a while and they don't really seem to be going anywhere anytime soon right now. So it's always good to know what you're doing with them. First thing we're going to look over, there are 3 different types of team bases as of right now. There are your standard 2x4s, which are the big colossal type ones, and they have the dial on one side with all of their combat values and symbols, and then on the other side is their asset dial, which we'll get into once we get to that point of their powers. The second type of team base are the smaller 2x4s, and 2x2s. Why am I saying 2x4s? 2x2s. They work just like a small colossal dial. All of their information is there, and it's just the one single dial, which means they actually come with their own separate asset dial to spin alongside them. And the third type that we have at the moment are the customizable team bases. We'll get more into depth in that a little bit later on. They are much like the 2x4 standard ones, but their setup is a little bit different. So the first thing we'll go over is force construction and how to add these to your team. Each of the team bases, much like any other character, will have on their dial their point value. Now, one thing you'll notice is that these team bases don't actually have full 100-point dials. Right now I'm looking at the Avengers, and their top dial is 575, then we go to 375, and then 175. The reason why this isn't full because you pay 5 points for each character that you attach to the base. This particular base here has 5 slots, so that adds an extra 25, which makes that 575 600, the 375 400, and the 175 200. So you can actually have it so that you don't have to fill up every slot, but you do have to have a minimum of at least 3 team characters on your base to be able to field it. So the other thing to note in the force construction part of it is that the symbol that's on their attack symbol is the working together team base symbol. It's a circle of fists. And the only thing that's really special about that is that actually tells you what their powers are, and those are all found on the back of the card, which we'll actually go in depth over what those powers do specifically for team bases. And the only other thing that does for you is that if the team base itself happens to get Earthbound neutralized, which is the lime green movement power, that normally you would kind of lose your combat abilities on that. But because of the working together symbol, you don't lose any of the team-based abilities. So those are always going to be there for you. So now that I've mentioned it, I'm going to go over working together. And that's how to actually give your team-based actions. Now, this has been errated since the watch list. When the watch list first came out, one of the things that was under scrutiny for the watch list was team bases, and they changed the wording on working together. The unfortunate part about it is that they never changed their printing of it, their print file, I guess, for the team bases, and that even the newer ones that have come out, like the zombie team base, are still printed under the old rules and not the new errata rules. So what working together does is that it gives you actions based on how many points your team base is. And under the new errata rules, you get 1 action when using working together. You get 1 action for every 200 points or fraction of that your team base is costed. To activate working together, you just give the team base a power action, and then it gets to use as many actions as free actions, as I said, with the fraction thereof. Now the fraction thereof seems to be the one that people get tripped up on. I'm not 100% sure why. But basically, for every 200 points or section part of 200 points that you have, you will get an action. So if your dial is, say, 250, you have 200 for one action, those 50 points go towards the next 200, so you get 2 actions. Now what working together does for you is that it gives you a selection of actions that you can use as a free action. Now the team base is only allowed to make 1 power action, 1 movement action, 1 close combat action, or 1 ranged action. Now, if you have more than 1 action that you're getting from your team build total, you can do any combination as those as long as you don't do like 2 power actions, 2 move actions, 2 range back. And you can make as many attacks as you like. Now, in a previous episode, I've gone over the difference between actions and attacks. So you can just sit there and make attacks, and that's fine. You can make 2 range combat attacks, 2 close combat attacks. That's okay. But once you get into the actions, you're limited to 1. So the next thing that's on the team-based card is practiced maneuvers. This is actually really important because of the size of the actual team bases. They do take up a lot of space, and unlike Colossals, they're supposed to represent a group of people working together. So what practice maneuvers gives you is that they have improved movement, ignore elevated, ignore characters, and the team base is actually able to occupy more than 1 elevation at once. So they don't get tripped up or stuck in a lot of maps that other colossal bases would get stuck in because of positioning. So you could actually put a team base on a map where half of the team base is on elevation 2 and half of the team base is on elevation 1. So they are the only character right now in the game that is actually allowed to occupy more than 1 level of elevation. The next part about the team bases that is very in-depth and does take a bit to sink in is the solo adventure. When you have a team base, you are able to give it a power action to take a character off the team base and put it on its actual dial. I've grabbed Captain America. So what you would do was you would take your team base and bring it off, give it a power action. You have now removed that character from the team base, put it on their dial. The other thing that Solo Adventure does is when you're bringing them off, you have to make sure that you line up the dials properly. So what you look at is the actual click number and the color of the click number. So on the Avengers one, we're going to go to Clix 6 is a blue number. So if I pop it off, when I'm on Clix 6 and I'm going to pop Captain America off, I have to look at his dial and find the first blue number. First time you see a blue number on Captain America, let's make sure I've got that right. Okay, the first time you see the blue number on Captain America is Click 3. So if my team base is on Click 6, a blue number, I have to find the blue number on my Solo Adventure one. He's now coming out on Click 3. So the more damage that your team base is, the lower in the dial that your character is actually going to come out on. The other thing that's important to note is how many points the character is. And why that's important is because you cannot pop off more points in characters than your team base is. So if your team base is 200 points and you bring out a character that's, say, 50 points, then you can only bring out another 150 points of characters off the base. If you have a character that's 200 points, then you can't solo venture anything else because now it's matching the point value of the actual team base that it came off of. And if you happen to have a 200-point team base and a character that's more than 200 points, you can't bring them off because that would go over your point value. So the other thing to note when you're matching the click number and trying to figure out how many points the character is, if you have a character like I've got Captain America here, who actually has more than one fielding cost, he can be either top dial 200 or lower in his dial, he's 100 points. So based off of where he comes off, when he comes off the team base, is to how many points he actually is. So on the example that I had, I already moved the dial. On the example I had of him at Clix 6 and bringing him on to Clix 3, he's still actually considered 200 points. But if we were to move it closer down to the next time, the color changes. Let's see, Clix 12 is a red click. So then we would bring it down to Clix 6 is a red click. So now I've actually gone past his second starting line. So now he's considered to be a 100-point character rather than the 200-point character. This is also important for when you're scoring solo adventure characters, is based off of what click they came off the team base on. Because if you were to KO this one at his Clix 6, where I brought him out as, he would only gain you 100 points, victory points, rather than 200. And because of this, where you are bringing more characters off of the team base and they're adding points, it is possible to end a game and have your victory points be more than the team build total for that game, that particular game. And now that I've talked about the point value, is that the starting line is actually whatever point or whatever click that you brought it out on. So in the example of here where we have Captain America coming out on Clix 6, Clix 6 is now considered his starting line. And if he was to gain some kind of power or anything that would allow him to heal, or if he was supported, say, he would not be able to go past that Clix 6 because that is now his starting line. So I did mention a little bit before that when you solo adventure, you have to have, when you force construct, that you have to have at least 3 characters on there to be able to feel the team base. Now that also is a power that carries through the entire time that you have that team base. So if you are solo adventuring, you also cannot leave less than 3 characters on there. You can only, on a character team base like this, where it has 5 characters, you can only remove 2. Now that being said, there are a couple of team bases, 2 at the moment, Trinity of Sin and Red Hood and the Outlaws, who actually have a trait on their card specifically saying that they can have, they're allowed to solo adventure so that there's only 2 characters on their team base, because those are team bases that only have 3 characters. So you are allowed to solo adventure in that particular one and have 2 left on the base rather than the 3 that is required for all the bigger ones. Now, why that becomes a problem in certain cases are the smaller team bases like the old Teen Titans and the Brotherhood of Mutants, where they only have 4 characters, but they're still required to have at least 3 characters on their team base. So if you don't pay the full points for them, you can't solo adventure. And then if you do pay the full points for them, you can only solo adventure 1 character at a time. You can't bring off more than 1 character because you're still required to have at least 3 characters on your base at all times. So the next thing after solo adventure is team reunited, which allows you to bring your characters back onto the team base. Which, in the same kind of faction, all it does is that you give the team base, once the team member is adjacent to the team base, give the team base a power action. Now you take them off the switch click and put them back on the team base with just a little bit of struggle. The also thing to note on that is when you bring a character back, he's now part of the team base. Any game effects that were affecting that character is still on that character's card. So, or that particular character. So if they had, say, a token for some game effect, or even an action token, it stays with that character, so that if that character was to solo adventure again, all of those game effects are still in play, but they don't get transferred over to the team base itself. That's important for things like zombie virus or Proxima Midnight's Tracer tokens. Those are things that are going to affect that particular character, but because it's not a replacement character, it's under a different game mechanic, it doesn't get transferred over to the team base itself and will stay with that particular team member. And since we're talking about game effects, team bases themselves do have some certain rules where they can't be pilots of vehicles, they can't be assigned relics or resources, and if a team member is solo ventured, that team member may also not be assigned a resource. Or relic. Or relic. So, next thing down on the card is team coordination. This is when you're considering theme team. So if your character, your team base, will have keywords much like any other character in the game, and it can be added into a themes team. This is another thing that actually got changed a little bit in the errata. So the character card itself is going to be a misprint. You do have to go to the player's guide to get the exact wording on how it has changed. Is that when you're counting it as a theme team, it doesn't count as one singular character. It is going to count as a +1 for each 100 points of the build total of the team base. So if I have this team base at its full 600, it's going to be +6 rather than the +5 for the single characters that are on there. So that was something that originally it used to count for every single character that was on there, but there was also team bases that had 7-8 characters on there. So they brought that down to just be +1 for each 100 points. So if you're playing it at 300, now you're only getting +3 to your initiative and theme prob rather than, +7. It was a little overpowered. And then the second thing that a team base can do is that it can either choose to use theme team probability control, or that the team base itself will just have probability control as a power that it can use. So the other thing to note with the team coordination probability control is that it is now subject to the named and generic theme team that was updated with the 2014 rulebook, is that now generic theme teams do not get the theme team probability control. So unfortunately, fielding somebody like Trinity of Sin in a mystical team, you would not get the theme team probability control or the singular probability control for that, because it's a generic keyword, not the actual named keyword that you need now for that probability control. So the next thing we're going to get to is the asset dial. I did mention it at the beginning of the episode, and now we can get a little more in depth for it. What the asset dial does is that it gives another set of powers to your team base depending on who is showing on the asset dial. Now, each character attached to the team base will have an asset dial ability that will be shown on their character card like any other ability that that character can use. So whenever their face shows up on the asset dial, you just look at their character card, and that'll let you know which power is going to be active for your team base. So when you're turning your dial, there will be a point where sometimes a number will show up, and that'll just be a power that the team base will have, which will show on the corresponding team base card. It'll let you know what power that is under that particular number. The other thing that's going to show up on a team base, or the asset dial, is the team base symbol, which is that circle of fists. Now that's kind of like a wild card. Whenever that shows up, you get to choose which of your active assets, abilities, you want to use for that turn. Now why I say active is that if there's a point where you're playing your team base and you don't have certain characters on there, either you never paid for them or they are currently on a solo adventure, you don't have access to their asset ability. So if their face shows up, right now I've got Rachel showing, and if she's not on my team base, then I can't use her power. The other thing with that wild card one is that whenever that shows up at the end of your turn, you have to roll a die to spin the dial. Otherwise, if that wasn't showing, you can actually just choose to not roll the dial. You can just keep it on there until you feel like rolling it again to switch up your powers. So all you do is just roll 1d6, turn the dial as many as the number of your d6. The other thing that's important to note is that asset abilities, the team abilities from your asset dial, are considered combat abilities that can be countered. So you can actually use the phrase, and I have on many times, I outwit your face. It's fun. I think it's fun. Stop. It's fun. Anywho, the other thing of note is for the third type of team base that I was telling you about are these customizable ones. Now, why they're considered customizable is that the base themselves will actually have numbers, a numbered slot on there, where unlike the nice, pretty sculpted team bases, these are just blank, generic kind of looking team bases, and you get to choose not only who goes on there, but where to put on them. And to compensate for that is that the asset dial, instead of showing a character's face, they just give you a number of what slot is active. Now, I currently have the Avengers set up, and if you note, these aren't your typical Avengers that are here. When this came out for the OP kit, the AVX storyline event, you were given, or you purchased a starter kit which came with 6 characters for the Avengers team base. The other thing that came out with that set was the LEs that were also able to go on. So right now I have Captain America and Thor from the starter kit, and then I have Black Panther, who is an LE. The other 2 people I have on here are Daredevil and Red Hulk. Now these guys came out in Deadpool, which was a set that came out after the storyline was actually complete. So the cool thing about the customizable ones is that after the team base has already come out, they can go back and add characters to these team bases as long as it actually shows that they can be put on that team base. Now, why I say it that way is that there are characters, much like Professor X here and Deadpool here, who are actually able to go on more than one team base. These 2 in particular can go on either the Avengers customizable base or the X-Men customizable base. So this is something that came up that I was actually a question that I answered on Facebook a couple of weeks ago when the Zombie Gladiator came out, and people were wondering if he was compatible with the new, not only the new Zombie team base, but also the old Shi'ar team base. The answer on that is no. He's not compatible with that. But the reason is that when a character is compatible with more than one team base, it'll actually say on its character card which team base it is compatible with. So that's all you have to look for on their asset ability, is just the collector number on which team base they go on. So the newest thing that they've decided to do with team bases is have I'm going to call them reinforcements, new recruits, is that they've taken older team bases, and Gambit doesn't want to be part of the team anymore. They've taken older team bases and introduced the new monthly OP kits. Now these are sets of characters that are going to be coming out every month, and so far the ones that have been listed as coming out are going to be compatible with older team bases. Some of them are going to be actual just same sculpts but different dials. So when you pop them off on Solar Adventure, it's going to give you a different set of powers that character can use. The other thing, and we don't, the one team base that we don't have, are going to be new characters that'll fit on there, and they'll actually have a trait on the character's card that says this character replaces this character on this team base. So the ones that have been previewed so far are Angel, who replaces Archangel on the X-Men Gold team base, and John Lynch, who replaces Grunge on the Gen 13 team base. We are expected to also see a Black Canary that's going to replace someone on the Justice League, and a Pete Wisdom who's going to replace someone on the Excalibur team base. Alright, now, said it's a lot to go over. They are a little in-depth, and I think I've gone over everything for you guys. If there's anything you think that I missed, just let me know in the comments below. We'll address it as soon as we can. And thanks for watching, guys. We'll have something again for you next week.